It's River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer. Well, if you've driven past Cedar Rapids lately, you may have noticed something new on the horizon. Massive windowless buildings humming around the clock, packed with servers that power, well, everything, it seems these days, from your Netflix queue to the newest AI chatbots and plenty of other things. Data centers are coming to Iowa very fast, and they're not coming quietly. We've been reporting on them here in our news at IPR, from Linn County to Dubuque County to also a tiny town south of Sioux City, I heard in our news today. Salix, Iowans there showing up by the hundreds to city council and council supervisor meetings asking the same basic questions. How much water will this use? How much will it cost us in our electricity rates? Who benefits? And who decides what's going on here? So today we're taking a deep dive into Iowa's data center moment. In just a few minutes, I'll be joined by a Linn County supervisor to talk about an ordinance his county passed this spring, and one that's already being held up as a model. And later, state geologist Keith Schilling will return to our program to tell us what we actually know and don't know about Iowa's groundwater. Of course, these data centers do need a lot of groundwater. And to close, I'll talk with a public health researcher, I believe from Harvard, who's trying to put a number on what data centers' power demands could mean for the air we breathe. But let's start with a researcher who's been studying how these massive projects play out in rural communities across the country. A big picture from Tony Pippa. He is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution's Center for Sustainable Development, where he leads research on rural policy. Before Brookings, he spent years working on international development at USAID and the State Department. For the past several years, his focus has been on much closer to home. What happens when a massive data center projects land in small rural communities, and whether those communities come out ahead? Tony, at the Brookings Institution, welcome to our program.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Now, I think you've said that putting a data center in your town may be the most unpopular thing you can propose to a community right now, more unpopular in polling than a nuclear power plant. What is your read on why this reaction is so visceral?
Well, first off, this is happening really, really quickly. The spending on construction starts for data centers overall has just accelerated significally, and the centers themselves have become much, much larger than they've been. When most of the time, over the past couple of decades, data centers have been powering the cloud, as you say, like where our data lives and where we're accessing it. But now with artificial intelligence, we just need more and more compute power. And so the installations are much, much larger. They're happening much, much quicker. And the question becomes, is this a good use of our natural resources and the amount of land that we have locally? How is it going to affect our quality of life? How is it going to affect the prices we're paying for electricity, as you mentioned? But the larger question is, who's in control? Who gets to say what's going to happen when and what happens in my community?
Mm-hmm. Okay, walk us through, because you've got the big picture here, especially on rural communities, about data centers. Over 100 in Iowa being built, having been built, or being proposed. I think that's the number here. In the big picture, when does it tend to be a net positive for a rural community, and when does it go wrong and be something less than that?
Yeah, so I think the bottom line is it's all about the deal. And the deal has a lot of different dimensions to it. Where is it located? How large is it? How much water does it take up? How much power will it need? And what infrastructure is already in place to service all of that? But then the larger question is, what kind of investment will it bring to that particular community, and is it worth the trade-offs that might come on the downside? Mm-hmm. There will be, as data centers get built, there are some jobs. There are definitely trade and construction jobs during the construction phase. There's also a lot of mess during the construction phase and a lot of stress on infrastructure. But there's not, especially for how large these centers are, there are not very many permanent jobs. You can't think of this as like if it were similarly a factory taking up that same amount of space, like all those jobs. That's not the case with these particular data centers. So what really is the potential positive is in the revenue that will come in terms of property taxes or other kinds of taxes to the local jurisdiction, to the school board, to the things that a community might want to use. How does it fit into, a potential larger economic development strategy? Not just one thing, not just one data center, but could that be the catalyst for an overall economy that enables more economic activity for the place in which it's going in? And the extent to which the developer and the company are investing back in the community, both paying the kind of the tax revenue, but even supporting other kinds of benefits that the community might think are really necessary.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left with you, Tony. What does it look like? Be specific, please. When a community gets it right, when it's been, when it gets it right between the developer, the residents, everybody involved, we've got happy people.
First off, I think there's a lot of transparency, and there's direct community engagement between the developer, the company, and the local residents themselves, where they're able to share what they think is important for their community, and to get, the developer and the company, that the customer that might be participating, to invest in their particular community. There might be investments in the schools. There might be investments in downtown revitalization. There might be investments and capital that's set aside for new companies that would be created with the data center. And that there's clear analysis and information on what it will do to the water resources, what it might do to the electric infrastructure and the electric rates, and that everyone will mitigate the risks that come with the construction.
Okay. I think you held a symposium recently where national security experts framed winning the AI race, that's a really big global picture here, as a patriotic priority. Local officials and residents are framing it as, hey, I want to protect my quality of life. That's my patriotic priority. How do you square those two versions of patriotism?
Well, that is why why you're feeling such tension and resistance at the local level, and that is why companies and even national policymakers are trying to move so quickly. They really do see us in a race with China, both for the future of how AI gets developed, but for the future of the American economy, honestly. And that's also creating a lot of competition in the market. Google's, competing with OpenAI, competing with SpaceX, or, Elon Musk companies competing with Meta. And so at a national level, there's a lot of pressure for us to move really quickly. But the important thing is that communities see this as positive for the people living there and for the residents who are there. And many residents have moved to rural communities or live in rural communities because they like the slower pace of life. They like the community relationships they have, and they like the access to the open space and the natural resources that they have. And they want to make sure that they don't lose that in the midst of massive data centers going in. So I don't know that there's a circle to square necessarily, as much as I think on a case-by-case basis, communities need to be able to ask the questions that they're asking, need to be able to get good answers to them, and need to make sure that the investments and that they're sharing in the benefits of what's happening with the data centers, rather than it just be decisions that are influenced by, large corporations with a lot of resources that can protect their interests, with very few of those benefits going to the local communities themselves. I think when you have accountability and transparency and you have benefits that are proportional to the investments being made, communities will be much happier and more willing to play host to the data centers that are being proposed for them.
A new Gallup poll finds roughly 7 in 10 Americans oppose having a data center built near them. This is, of course, becoming a real flashpoint also in political primaries this year. And the EPA has also signaled it doesn't plan to regulate data centers at the federal level. What do you think about that? And we've really got less than 2 minutes here. We have that high public opposition, no federal guardrails. What does that point to?
Yeah, it does mean that states and localities are really going to be the ones that are having to create the rules by which these companies play. And interestingly, that resistance that you talked about cuts across political lines. It's both Democrat and Republican. It really doesn't have a party attached to it. It really is more about local and where this is happening. I do think that federal guardrails, I think we may see as the politics play out of this, we may see some more momentum for some policy guardrails at the federal level. Mm-hmm. You saw the president, try to negotiate a pledge with the major companies saying that as data centers go in, they will pledge that the electrical rates won't rise with them. I think you'll see at least some more of that, but I think depending on what happens with the politics, especially in the midterms, you may see some more increased momentum for having some federal guardrails in place.
In 30 seconds from where you sit, Tony, are moratoriums a good tool, or do they just delay an inevitable fight?
Well, I think moratoriums can give time for communities to organize themselves, both about what they think they want and what their bottom lines and what they really need if a data center is going to go in. And given the asymmetry of that negotiation, I think they're a good thing. If communities feel like they need them to take a breath and get their act together and access the expertise and the resources they need, I think they can be really useful.
Tony Pippa, thank you for joining us live, Senior Fellow at the Center for Sustainable Development at the Brookings Institution, with a national perspective on data centers, especially for rural communities. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Coming up, we turn to Iowa specifically. A Linn County Supervisor on the ordinance his board just passed. Join our conversation, 1-866-780-9100, River to River at iowapublicradio.org. Back with more River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer, talking today about the wave of data center proposals moving through Iowa and the growing public pushback over water, power, noise, and trust. Who makes the decisions about these? Various perspectives this hour. Sami Scheetz joins me in the studio now. He represents District 2 on the Linn County Board of Supervisors earlier this year after Google approached that county about expanding a data center campus near Palo next to the Duane Arnold Energy Center. Linn County spent months developing what's become one of the most detailed data center ordinances in the state. Supervisor Scheetz, Sami, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
Give us a quick update on how we got here. Give us some context. I understand Google first approached Linn County about expanding near the Eastern Iowa Airport. What brought you to this point, quickly?
So, Google had approached us last year, and what we had seen throughout the country and Iowa was kind of two paths that local governments had taken. One path was basically allowing data centers to come into communities by right as natural, sort of regular industrial development in those communities. On the other end of the spectrum, we had seen a lot of communities and continue to see communities have data center moratoriums in place and basically say we're not going to allow any data center development in our jurisdiction whatsoever. We at the county, Linn County, fundamentally believed that there was a middle path, and so we spent 7-8 months doing research, studying other counties across the country like Loudoun County and Virginia, looking at some cases where we think local governments got it wrong in terms of regulation. And we said, we want to allow this type of development in our community, but we want to have a basic set of regulations and standards that these companies must follow if they want to come into our community. So we went through that process for months and months. We hired different consultants from around the country to review our ordinance. And the biggest question that we got from constituents was, what is the benefit of these projects to our community? And so we wanted to be able to have an ordinance in Linn County that we could defend, that could tell constituents, our residents, here's the benefit that we have from these projects.
And you have that ordinance in place since when?
Since February of this year.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I imagine it's many pages long.
It is.
Give us a half-page version of the most important points.
So the most important points, and one of the biggest things we heard from residents, was concerns related to water. And so what our ordinance does, it requires any data center project developer to do an independent water balance study that proves, not the company, but having an independent third party say there is enough water to support your data center development in our community. We've heard that concern over and over. That's not just a concern in Linn County. It's across the state and country that residents are concerned about water use. So we want companies to demonstrate that they have enough water. Mm-hmm. We incorporated things like setbacks, noise pollution. We had solid waste agreements that we required data center developers to enter into. And most importantly, we have a requirement that a data center developer enters into an economic development agreement with Linn County. Because again, another concern we'd heard over and over is why are trillion-dollar corporations like Google, Amazon, Microsoft getting tax breaks for projects that are going to create billions of dollars in profit for them? So we also required in that ordinance an economic development agreement to make sure that they're paying their fair share and that the community is seeing real benefits from these projects as well.
Mm-hmm. Since your ordinance passed, we've seen the Johnson County moratorium, Dubuque County voting for a 12-month moratorium after hundreds showed up to a hearing there. We have Clinton's city council voting down a moratorium, I believe, despite a packed house. And now the small town off in western Iowa, south of Sioux City, Salix, where residents are showing up by the hundreds after a large land annexation tied to a possible Mid-American Link data center project. When you look at this range of responses, what do you think Iowa counties and cities are getting right or wrong here?
I think the path that we took in Linn County was kind of the sweet spot in the middle path approach. We listened to residents. We had over 100 people come to our public hearing on our data center ordinance. We incorporated feedback from that public hearing. And we were transparent throughout the process. We announced when we had Google approach us. We've been very transparent with the public throughout that process. And I think your last speaker kind of touched on this, but something that the public is really demanding across the country is that governments are being transparent and forthcoming when it comes to these projects, that not just, one day of the week there's a council meeting or a supervisor meeting and there's a $1 billion project announced that's going to have huge impacts on the community. We have been transparent in Linn County, and I would encourage other local governments to continue in that path of transparency. But I do think our ordinance does a very good job of saying we're going to be both pro-growth and pro-community, and I think there's a good way for local governments to balance economic development concerns in a way that protects the interests of residents.
Broadly speaking, what's been reaction to the ordinance in place since February from all parties involved? Do all parties think it's a fair deal, a fair way to approach it, or do, I don't know, the Google or others, do they say, no, too many restrictions?
We have received overwhelming support from residents that have said thank you for standing up for our community. Thank you for putting in place basic protections, specifically on the water provisions in our ordinance. I think those are very important. We've heard from residents overwhelmingly in a bipartisan, Republican, Independents, Democrats, saying, please protect us and ensure that we know that there is enough water to support these projects. And so I think we've had very positive feedback, and we've actually had other local governments reach out to us and say, we've had, a proposed project. What's a good kind of middle path? Because there are a lot of governments that want to support this type of economic development, but are hearing the concerns, the very legitimate concerns from the residents.
This is a moneymaker for local communities. You're not scaring away Google and the like?
No, I think we are doing it in Linn County. We have a path that is pro-growth, pro-development, allows for this kind of construction if companies are willing to pay their fair share to residents and follow some basic set of rules that we think they are able to meet.
Supervisor Scheetz, sitting next to you in the studio here in Iowa City, Keith Schilling. He's been on our show a number of times, Iowa's state geologist. Hi, Keith.
Hi, Ben.
And we'll get your microphone on. There we go. And Keith, we want to drill down on the water concerns here because you're the Iowa State geologist based at the Iowa Geological Survey. A lot of debate over the resource, how much groundwater actually is here in Iowa to be used, where it is, and how well equipped we are to make good decisions about who gets to use it. In this context, what do you say about is it so massive, the needs of the data centers? or is it more of a question of where do we get the water from?
Yeah, it's really the latter. I've said many times I've been on this program, Iowa's groundwater is not evenly distributed. So there's places where you have abundant water resources to support a data center, and there's locations where you don't. So, for example, the largest data center in Iowa is a Google site in Council Bluffs. Well, it's sitting on the Missouri River alluvial aquifer, 200 feet of sand and gravel next to the Missouri River. There's a lot of water there to be able to use. In other cases, you're putting data centers in locations where we do not have the water resources. So it is not a one-size-fits-all, and it cannot be all about economic development. The water decision has to enter in up front.
Well, what do you do? What can a community do if there's a water scarcity? They want to take advantage of this economic development while protecting quality of life in a community. Let's say you don't have plentiful water.
Yeah, the options are limited. So sometimes the economic development question gets asked first, where sometimes I feel like the water question should be asked first. Do you have water to support this industry if you want this type of cooling involved? So I don't know. I feel like sometimes the dollar signs get in the way a little bit, and there is a water resource issue that should be addressed up front.
Mm-hmm. Keith, I think you've compared the current moment in a way to the ethanol boom 10 plus years ago. There was a similar wave about the concern of water use to make ethanol that eventually faded from public attention largely, I think. Is that a useful comparison here at all?
It can be. There were ethanol plants were cropping up left and right across Iowa 10, 20 years ago with the thought that it takes 3 or 4 gallons of water to make a gallon of ethanol. And there was a lot of local concern, as rightly there should be, given water resources issues. But ethanol plants are largely built out, and to be honest, it's largely faded in the background. So doesn't mean this issue is going away. I do not see data usage declining in the future, but they do become part of the norm at some point.
Let's talk about monitoring of how much water we have, because there's a lot, we've talked about this before, a lot that we don't know. If you had to grade Iowa right now on whether we have enough knowledge about our groundwater, surface water is easier to measure, I guess, to make good decisions about data centers, what would the grade be?
Okay, I won't say F, but it's a D at best, just because we do not monitor the number of aquifers we have or in the spatial distribution of aquifers across the state. So we do a very poor job. On the good side, much of our best monitoring is in actually Linn County, where we've had a network of wells there for a while. But across the state, it's really, really inadequate.
So we're kind of operating blind in many cases.
Very much so. So the only way you're going to know if there's an impact is if you measure the conditions before that use shows up. And we just do not do that very well.
And these aquifers replenish themselves very slowly.
They can, absolutely. So if you get a deep aquifer that we've talked about, the water could be 500,000 million years old water. That's not coming back. On the other hand, shallow aquifers are replenished with rainfall. You've got opportunities to balance with the water budget. Water comes in, water goes out, and know what the net difference is.
Sami Scheetz in Linn County, what does the water situation look like, and how did you take care of that with the ordinance that was passed?
So like I said, I think the 2 provisions that are really important, kind of groundbreaking in our ordinance is one, that requirement for an independent water balance study that proves that there is enough water. The other really important piece of our ordinance is that it would require a data center developer to enter into a binding water use agreement with Linn County, and that would kind of help facilitate reporting, making sure that they're coordinating with the Iowa DNR, because in projects like the one that's proposed outside of Palo, that's going to be using the Cedar River, the Iowa DNR is the main regulator when it comes to water in that case. So those are the 2 kind of main regulations we put into our ordinance in Linn County.
As state geologist, Keith, what do you think of Linn County's new ordinance concerning water, your expertise?
I think there's some real value there. You do need to plan. If you had a data center in Linn County with a well in the middle of the county pumping thousands of gallons a minute, you are going to see an impact. And you don't know how local or large an impact that would be. You would need to have the regulations in place to know that residents are protected. So totally agree with that. And I do believe there is a place for municipalities and for the state to weigh in on this issue in terms of being the ones actually in charge of issuing permits and getting the water resources assessed to know whether these new uses could be sustainable or not.
Keith Schilling, in watching this story quickly develop over the past couple of years, especially the last few months, is there something here in the framing of it, the way it's been covered, that strikes you as perhaps we're missing it, or at a point that you want to emphasize here?
Well, I do feel like there's definitely a local issue involved that communities, I mentioned before with economic development, sometimes they want to have these industries come in, and if they have the water, they want to be able to sell the water to these systems. So in the end, the data centers are a large customer that's coming in, and the cities have to decide, not the county. I mean, if it's a regional county entity, it's very different. But if cities like the city of Cedar Rapids believes they have the water to support it, that's the data center is just another customer. The counties are a different scale. They're kind of in this in-between quasi, in between the gaps of the cities and the state here to have that sort of issue. And there's a lot of local concerns there. But there is definitely a requirement, a need for cities and the state to step up and say, we are the regulators of water in Iowa. We need to be able to do that.
Whether you're a city or a county, cities exist in counties,
Yes.
and geology doesn't respect our political borders, does it?
No, it does not.
What would you add or subtract or agree or disagree with Sami Scheetz on that assessment of it?
I think what's really important for listeners, obviously on the statewide program, to understand too, is that I think at some point our state government needs to take a real look and kind of pass some sort of policy related to water use, reporting, utilities, because these are regional projects that have impacts on hundreds of thousands of people in regions across the state. And so when you have local governments, whether it's Linn County or others, trying to put these frameworks in place, unfortunately, sometimes these hyperscaler massive companies are able to just shift into another jurisdiction and kind of seek regulation that's
whack-a-mole.
Seek regulation that's more favorable to them.
Yeah. Do you see lawmakers in Iowa open to that? Is there a dialogue or resistance to that? What can you say about whether we may see some of that in the next session?
Well, what I've seen in conversations with lawmakers is there's a lot of apprehension and awareness of the issue, but not a whole lot of motivation to take action yet. So we get a lot of good head nods, and that's so far all that's that occurred.
You agree, Sami?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to have a new governor after the election, and so we'll see a new legislature. So I think we'll see
definitely
if there's an
we'll
appetite.
Have a new governor.
We'll definitely have a new governor. We'll see if there's an appetite to address the issue next year.
Sami Scheetz, if another Iowa county called you today, especially because your ordinance is being held up as a model, and said, hey, we just got approached by a developer, where do we start, Supervisor Scheetz? What's the first things you would tell them?
I would say take time to develop a meaningful ordinance that protects residents, but also does allow with baseline guardrails for this kind of development. I think it is important to just note in Cedar Rapids and Linn County, we are seeing over 8,500 jobs per day on these construction sites, and those are rippling into our economy. Restaurants are full. Hotels are full.
Is it your county where I see workers in RVs, in RV parks?
Yeah, I mean, hotels are booked out for years now. And there are high school students in Linn County that can join a union apprenticeship and work on data centers for the next 5, 10, 15 years and create generational wealth for themselves and their families.
And these
are
good paying
They're excellent paying jobs. And so I want to lightly push back. We kind of hear the term temporary jobs. But if you look at Council Bluffs, Des Moines, some of the places that have had data center development for decades, these are really, really meaningful, life-changing types of work. And so I don't want to minimize some of the benefits that these communities are seeing from these data center developments.
Right. And it sounds like your big takeaway here, we're going away in a few seconds, Keith, is cities and counties should be asking, before they get all excited about the economic development, they need to say, do we have the water, rather than after getting excited.
Yeah, that's my takeaway for sure. We need to be proactive on the water issues. Ask that question first.
All right, very good. Keith Schilling, Iowa's state geologist, director of the Iowa Geological Survey, and Sami Scheetz, Linn County Supervisor. We're talking about crafting Iowa's most detailed local data center ordinance, one being held up as a model. Gentlemen, thank you for coming in to the studio.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
We'll continue to talk about Iowa's data center boom and the requirements. We'll turn to a question in just a moment that's gotten less attention so far. Data centers' growing appetite for power, what that could mean for the air that we breathe. When we return, it's River to River from IPR News. We're back with more River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer, talking this hour perspectives on Iowa's data center boom from the ordinance in Linn County we heard about from a supervisor there, passed this spring and enforced since February, to a patchwork of moratoriums, votes playing out around the state in Dubuque County, Clinton, elsewhere, groundwater questions underneath it all, along with a lot of other questions. For this final segment, we're joined by Michael Cork. Michael is a public health scientist at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and co-founder and CEO of Empower Analytics Group. That's a consulting group focused on the public health impacts of energy infrastructure, including data centers. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Of course, it's great to be here.
We've explored a lot of aspects here, a lot of concerns that people have with these data centers popping up so quickly. I think you've described data centers as not just an energy or a climate issue, but a public health issue, and that's been largely missing from the conversation. Make the case for that. What is the connection to our public health here?
Yeah. So the thing is that data centers require a ton of power, and the way we power that matters. So this isn't just an energy and a climate issue, it's a public health issue. If we are going to decide to power a lot of our data centers using fossil fuel combustion, we know this leads to particulate matter, fine particulate matter, which drives nearly 90% of the health impacts from air pollution. And it's often left out of traditional energy and climate assessments and infrastructure planning decisions.
Mm-hmm. So get down to explain what's going into the air that may impact our health. Is this fine particulate matter? And for those who haven't heard that term, what do we mean by that?
Yeah, so fine particulate matter is a type of air pollution that is produced during combustion and refers to a very small pollution. So it's also abbreviated PM2.5. It refers to really small particles. The reason they're dangerous is also because of their size. These particles can penetrate deep into the lungs and even enter the bloodstream. And the science on this is very clear. There's a lot of really high quality science that shows that this can lead to increases in cardiovascular events, premature mortality, stroke, and a host of other health outcomes.
Mm-hmm. And so, we're accustomed to, or have become accustomed to, regular sort of smoky summers sometimes when we have wildfires out west or up in Canada and that blowing down. That's a fine particulate matter. Is it similar to that? Because that's something we notice, but can particulate matter be something that we don't notice? It's so small?
Yeah, that's a great point. So fine particulate matter comes in a lot of different forms and is produced by a lot of different events in industry. So it's important to note that there's a lot of fine particulate matter in the background already before we're even thinking about expanding our energy. And wildfires is a great example of that. Airline industry, the automotive industry are all sources of fine particulate matter. And there are a bunch of different sources. So sometimes it can be really visible and smoggy, like you see with wildfires, and other times it's not visible to the naked eye, but still has a host of health outcomes that we know and can measure.
Mm-hmm. What about the EPA here? Does it set limits on that? Is there a safe threshold for fine particulate matter?
Yeah, so that's another great point, which is the EPA does have a national ambient air quality standards, which are a limit for all different sources of fine particulate matter. And this is informed by scientific studies that show how fine particulate matter exposure relates to health outcomes. One thing that's important to note, though, is that being in compliance with the national ambient air quality standards does not mean that that's not necessarily a safe threshold, and the EPA actually notes that. there is no safe limit, and that means that any increase in fine particulate matter, we know from the science, will increase the risk of these health outcomes.
Mm-hmm. And does it matter under the EPA what type of administration is in power? Because an EPA can have teeth or not teeth, or have different sets of, how much fine particulate matter is out there. Has that waxed and waned over the years in this matter?
That's something I'm not as much an expert on, but it is certainly true that these national ambient air quality limits are set at the federal level. And so they are able to, there's kind of distinct mechanisms to think about tightening or raising these limits. The current limit of 9 micrograms per cubic meter was set during the Biden administration. And so that is something to keep an eye on, is how these federal limits may change over time.
Mm-hmm. So I understand your group has analyzed facilities in rural areas and found that they're associated with millions of dollars in health damages. When I say these facilities, I mean new data centers in projects built in just the last year or two. Walk us through how you actually calculate something like that, millions of dollars in health damages.
Yeah. So what we do is when we look at a new facility, we try to understand how much pollution is going to leave that plant. And that can either be done by looking at comparable facilities that have happened in the past, but more recently, data centers are kind of a new emerging infrastructure. And so we'll look at air permits to see what the maximum permitted level of emissions are. Then we need to understand how this pollution is going to travel through the air. We do this using peer-reviewed dispersion models. And then we need to understand who are the people that are going to be most impacted. And we can do this by using tools that have also been developed by the EPA, where we can translate increases in pollution to estimated increases in different health outcomes, like premature deaths, like strokes, like hospitalizations, like asthma attacks. And then we use a federal valuation framework that was also developed by the EPA to translate that into health damages. So it's kind of a standard structure for how we might infer an increase in pollution and how that would translate into health damages for the surrounding community.
Mm-hmm. And when you look at, I don't know how much you know about Iowa, but if you do, please share, are there surprising findings here about the new data center facilities here and their impact on health here in the state?
One thing that I think is really important is that not all data centers are created equal with regard to the amount of air pollution specifically that they're going to emit. And one really important consideration is how they're going to be powered. There's an increasing trend of data centers that are using on-site fossil fuel generation, where they're using turbines 24/7 to power the data centers. And from an air pollution perspective, those are potentially on the more harmful side. I've analyzed facilities across rural West Virginia, Northern Virginia, the Memphis area, and South Carolina, and the pattern is consistent with, if you have facilities that are using on-site power, these have been associated with tens of millions of dollars in annual health damages. Mm-hmm. And there are, many more that are considering being built.
Right. And Iowa's only nuclear power plant is planned, scheduled to go back online here. A lot of that power going to power data centers. So are you seeing that push across the country here too? I guess the question too is, it depends on how you define public health, whether you think putting nuclear power plants back online is a good option.
Yeah, so that's another important consideration. So on the air pollution specifically, right, when we compare to nuclear doesn't produce the combustion particles that drive the health damages that I've studied in some of the work that I've done. But I think it's important to note that nuclear has its own public health questions, like water use, safety oversight, which aren't really my area. Mm-hmm. But I think it really speaks to why we need public health and public health professionals to be, sitting at the table and helping shape these decisions so we can mitigate some of the harms while getting some of the benefits.
Yeah. And as we talked about earlier in this program, we don't have the federal laws here. I understand recently the EPA signaled it doesn't plan to regulate data centers at a federal level. This leaves air quality, other impacts almost entirely to states and local governments. From a public health standpoint, Michael, what does that mean for places like Iowa, where local officials may not have the expertise, or do they, or the resources to evaluate something like a proposed on-site gas plant?
Yeah. Well, my biggest concern is we can't solve a problem we haven't measured. And right now, permitting decisions for data centers are often being made without any clear accounting of their public health costs. And that gap means that these health damages are systematically being left out. That gap is why I founded Empower Analytics Group, because I believe that we need independent science-based analysis that can help bring these costs into decision-making.
Uh-huh. Give us some information for those listening who may have a data center proposed or popping up in their area. What should residents near projects, either proposed or underway, be asking, and what should they go to push for, in your view?
Yeah, I think the single most important thing to ask is how it's going to be powered, because for air pollution, that's what's going to determine a lot of the health impact. So a data center drawing from the existing grid is a different question than one bringing on new fossil fuel combustion to run itself. So I'd say the first question is, where is this power coming from? And does it involve new on-site or nearby gas or diesel generators? And if the answer involves combustion, I think there are a handful of concrete things to ask for. First, I would say an independent health impact assessment is required, not just an air permit, because there are actually different documents answering different questions. A permit asks whether the facility meets the legal limits at the property line. A health impact assessment asks whether the added pollution and what that means for people breathing it across the whole region. I also think that this should be done by someone independent of the developer and the utility, and that it should be part of the public record before any vote. I also think that it sounds like you've had people in to talk about other important issues, right? Air pollution and health is a really crucial one, but there are others, and it's important to get good information on this, on water use, on noise, on the impact on ratepayers. So generally, I think more information is needed for people to make informed decisions.
Yeah. We know when it comes to air pollution in our country that it's often the communities with lower incomes that bear the burden of pollution. Is that also true in this case with the data centers that you've studied?
Yeah, I can't speak too much in generalities, but we've seen, for example, a proposed power plant that's going to power the Colossus 2 data center in the Memphis area, that this is going into a region that is already facing high levels of air pollution and is also a socially vulnerable communities. So these are communities that are less able to absorb additional stress. And so that we see when these health impact assessments are not being done, that data centers are often being cited in communities that already face disproportionately high impacts from air pollution. And so that's another important consideration and kind of an environmental justice concern.
Yeah. A very fast-moving story here, developments, under-measured, a little bit ignored, I guess, in your view. What would it take for public health to become really more of a standard part of how these projects, these data center projects, get reviewed in a place like Iowa?
I think educating communities and others about what are the real concerns and impacts of these data centers and how they might be impacting community health. I think the standard setting of requiring an independent health impact assessment is crucial. And I'm going to repeat that it's important to measure these data points, because if we are not factoring in the health damages, then those costs are not being accounted for when we're making decisions. And I think only with accounting for these costs can we innovate and create solutions that lead to economic development that are not at the cost of community health.
Mm-hmm. As we've learned earlier in the program, I don't think you were with us for much of that, but really piecemeal. Iowa communities at a county or city level weighing these proposals one at a time. Sometimes, it's very in a hurry-up mode because community governments have been caught off guard. And people have been caught off guard. Is there anything that suggests the state itself, I don't know if you know about Iowa specifically, might step in with some statewide standards? Because otherwise, it seems to be a game of whack-a-mole where the big data center companies can go, if an ordinance is too strict in their eyes or they don't like something, they can move a few miles down the road, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and something that I think about a lot is that air pollution, does not respect borders. It can often travel far from its source. So we know that the decisions that are being made in adjacent communities, adjacent towns, even states, can impact residents of different areas. That's why it's so important to really be thinking holistically. And I think that it is important for residents and communities to begin advocating for what they think they need in order to make these important decisions. And I do think there is a role for communities, a role for regulators, and a role for industry to all come together to decide on what are the important considerations to make in this emerging field, in the emerging industry.
Michael, we have a couple minutes left. What do you want to emphasize, or perhaps something that has been omitted in our conversation up to now that you'd like to bring out in the final minute or two?
I think that, if there's one thing I want people to take away from this, it's that we can't manage the problem we haven't measured, and the decisions being made right now about how to power this build out will shape the air Iowans and Americans breathe for decades. I think the encouraging part is that it's not too late. These choices are still being made. And I think we're collectively deciding what is the right way to power these facilities. And we know that this can make an enormous difference to community health. So I think this is the exact moment to get the health picture on the table alongside jobs and investment. I think we have a real chance to get this right, and it only comes from independent science-based assessments being emphasized.
Mm-hmm. What will you be watching the coming weeks and months to know if, this is the public health concerns are being answered in a better way than they have at this point?
Yes, definitely. One thing that really guides my work is trying to take the vast literature of well-documented science that shows how air pollution can translate into health outcomes and putting it in a way that is intelligible to people, that people can understand and use, because I think the science is clear. It just hasn't really been at the table in helping inform these decisions.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about the reporting nationwide or here in the Midwest about this and the health? Has there been much reporting? Would you like to see more?
I think that what has been clear since the work that I've done is that health is something that is many people care about, and I think cuts along political lines. And I think that health deserves to be more in the conversation. That's something I feel really strongly about, and I'm going to keep working on to make sure that health is one of the concerns that's brought to the forefront, and that we know that we have a lot of ability to mitigate a lot of these health concerns and build a better future that still is promising with this advances in AI.
Michael, in a few seconds, where can people go online to find more about public health and the impact by data centers so they can be armed with the information for their county or town that maybe just got approached by a data center developer?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really good resources that people can look to. We've built a website and Power Analytics group that links to a lot of the reports we've done, and also some resources that community members can have when they're thinking about what are the right questions to ask when a data center is coming to town. I think this is something that I hope is going to emerge more, and I think there's a lot of people interested in this. Okay, we got to go. Michael Cork, thank you very much, public health scientist. We appreciate it. Yeah, thank you so much. Today's show produced by Samantha McIntosh, technical support from Caitlin Troutman and Jackson Troutman.